Picture this. You're sitting in the left seat of an aircraft. The sun is completely gone and you're enveloped in the pitch black of night. Your mission? To land the plane safely. In today's explainer, we're taking a ride along in a left-hand circuit to understand exactly how pilots judge night landings purely by sight. We're going to explore the fascinating and honestly, sometimes terrifying visual illusions that dictate a pilot's split-second decisions during a nighttime descent. Here is the flight plan for our explainer today. We'll run through our pre-landing bumfish checks, set up the approach, look at the undershoot danger, find that ideal perspective, tackle the overshoot danger, and wrap up with trusting your eyes. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, pre-landing bumfish checks. When you're flying in the absolute dark, you don't have the horizon, the trees, or the ground to give you a sense of depth. You rely entirely on the flare path. These two rows of flares, or lights, are literally your lifeline. The way they look, their geometry and perspective from the cockpit, tells you exactly where you are in the sky relative to the runway. But before we even look outside, we build our safety foundation with the bumfish checklist. Let's tick through it real quick. B, brake pressure checked. U, undercarriage down and locked, though if we're in a Cessna 172, that's already fixed. M is for mixture rich and ammeter 0 or positive. F, fuel selector on both, shutoff valve on. I stands for ignitions on both, with our engine temperatures and pressures firmly in the green. S ensures security, meaning seatbelts fastened and absolutely no loose articles flying around. And finally, H is our height check to confirm our circuit altitude. With that done, we flip on our landing and taxi lights, make our flare path demo radio call, and we're good to go. Moving right along to Section 2, setting up the approach. To really see these visual illusions, we're going to intentionally mess up our setup just a bit. Normally, you'd turn exactly when the beginning of the flare path hits that 7 o'clock mark over your left shoulder. But today, we're going to purposefully delay our turn to the base leg by exactly 10 seconds past that mark. We'll fly parallel on the dead wind side just a little longer. By doing this, when we finally turn to base, roll out, and start our turn onto finals, we're coming in from a less than ideal angle. This deliberate mistake is exactly what lets us observe how the flares visually behave during descent. Which brings us to Section 3, the undershoot danger. So as we descend and look left, we see a genuinely terrifying perspective, a dangerously undershooting approach. Imagine looking out the window, descending too quickly or too low. Because of your angle, the natural spacing between the individual flares completely vanishes. The distances between them visually compress until they blur into solid, continuous lines of light. If you see two solid parallel lines of fire rushing up at you, it means you're going to hit the ground short of the runway. It's a massive, critical warning sign from your own eyes. If you ever see those merging lights in a real scenario, you execute a go-around. Immediately, you apply full power, abort the landing, and climb back up to safety. There is no salvaging an approach when the flares merge into continuous rows. But hey, since this is a demonstration, we'll just simulate a mid-air correction instead. To correct this undershoot right now, we open the throttle to around 2,000 RPM, hold our speed steady at 65 knots, and fly level at exactly 400 feet above ground level, adjusting our trim to lock it in. We're essentially hitting pause on our descent to let the geometry of the approach catch up with us. And that leads us perfectly into Section 4, finding the ideal perspective. As we level out, those terrifying solid lines start pulling apart. The distances between the flares actively increase. So we have to ask ourselves, if merged lines mean we're crossing short, what exactly tells our brain that we're perfectly on the glide path? Boom, evenly spaced flares. When they look perfectly and evenly spaced, it's like a moment of absolute clarity in the dark. You've hit the visual sweet spot. The distance from the first flare to the second looks identical to the distance from the second to the third, all the way down the runway. As a night aviator, this exact geometry is what you are always aiming for. It's your eyes telling you that your altitude and distance perfectly match the required glide slope. But we won't stay in the sweet spot for long. Here is Section 5, the overshoot danger. Look at the dramatic contrast here between our two major danger zones. We know undershooting squishes the flares into continuous rows, but overshooting? As we push past the ideal point and get too high, the distances between the flares increase drastically. They start looking incredibly wide apart, almost scattered. If you look down and see huge, increasing gaps between the lights, you're going to overshoot the runway and float right past your landing zone. And just like before, the required action here is to go round. Finally, let's wrap this up in Section 6, Summary, Trusting Your Eyes. We'll complete our overshoot action, turn off the landing lights, and review.
Think of this as your ultimate cheat sheet. It breaks down the visual triggers and the life-saving actions tied to them. Dangerously undershooting? Flares merge into rows. Action, go round. Badly overshooting? Flares are wide apart and getting wider. Action, go round. But right there in the middle is your ideal approach. Flares evenly spaced. That is the one perspective you are constantly fighting to maintain in that windshield.
I really hope this explainer highlighted just how vital mastering these subtle perspectives is for aviators. Flying at night strips away basically all the comforting visual data we have during the day, leaving you with nothing but a few glowing dots in the darkness. But by understanding how those dots stretch, merge, or space out evenly, you can read them like an instrument panel. It's a giant puzzle of mental geometry happening in real time. So think about it. If you were in that left seat, descending toward a pitch-black runway with nothing but flares to guide you, would you trust your eyes enough to make the right call?